Hello, and it is with great pleasure that we introduce our newest presentation from Literacy Bug. Today we're going to be exploring how to apply the understanding that we've developed about literacy development and about the stages of literacy development, and we're going to apply that understanding to real-world case studies. And in particular, I'm quite excited about this presentation because I think it's a culmination of a lot of the work on Literacy Bug, because it asks the question about how do I support learners and a diversity of learners now that I have a better idea of what are the components of literacy as well as what are the stages of literacy development over time. So the objective is to apply our collected knowledge to develop appropriate instructional plans and activities for a diverse range of learners at different stages of language and literacy development. And I have this icon over here about resources, and you'll be pulling upon resources from other presentations. Resources about the stages of literacy development, about the simple model of literacy and the components of literacy, as well as resources on recommended activities to develop phonemic awareness, to develop phonics knowledge, to develop comprehension skills, oral language, and beyond. But what we want to do is say, well, we know what we need to do, but how do we arrange that practice? And so a specific presentation that precedes this one is the presentation called Planning and Monitoring for Effective Teaching and Learning. So I'll provide the YouTube link there, as well as links to two versions of those slides. But what also applies are the other presentations so far in the series, such as an overview of literacy development, teaching according to the stages of development, further resources for planning and monitoring of instruction, as well as key tenets about the mastering of the alphabetic principle. And before you take too many notes whilst watching this video, you can download these slides from this bit.ly link on the screen. This link and all the other links will appear either in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or in the body text of the Literacy Bug blog if you're watching it sort of within the Literacy Bug. So that will be other recommended resources, a little bit of context to the presentation. Without further ado, let's get started. So, what do we already know? We know what we need to know to best support in literacy teaching, if I'm a classroom teacher, or I'm an early childhood educator, or if I'm a tutor, or also as a parent, I need to have an understanding of language and literacy development, have some understanding about how does language development, what do I need to do to foster the best in language development as well as literacy development? When should I be concerned? And also, when should I avoid being complacent? You know, a child might be making superb progress, but there's warning signs that in the next stage of development, they may struggle. I should also understand, based upon that, when are certain skills developed? And what are the types of activities and strategies and materials I should use across the lifespan to help learners really grow in their literacy? How do I establish learning routines, whether in the classroom, formally in that literacy block, or informally at home, or throughout the school culture, or in the early childhood setting? What are some learning routines that will really maximize the learner's potential? What are some barriers that we should be aware of? And what are some opportunities that we should take advantage of? And throughout all this process, how do I monitor the learner's progress so I can adapt and adjust teaching and learning along the way? And those are things that we need to know straight from the outset. We also need to recognize that every single stage of literacy learning is different. So as a child develops literacy, what is deemed the focus of instruction will change. And so therefore, as this quote says, the role of the instructor has to change accordingly. So the focus of literacy in first grade or in kindergarten or in early childhood is much different than fourth grade or year 4 or the needs of an adult. So how is my understanding of the stages of literacy instruction and the skills that a child has developed impact my role as an instructor, whether I'm a parent, whether I'm a teacher, whether I'm a tutor, etc. And so this is just a table. Can't read it on the screen here, but it looks at what's the nature of literacy from birth to 6 years old, from 6 to 7 years old, from 7 to 9 years old, from 9 to 12 years old, from 12 to 16 years old, and so on? What are the expectations, and how do they grow and change over time, and how does my instruction change? Now, all of that we won't cover today, but if you want to explore that, it's explored in this presentation, Teaching According to the Stages of Literacy Development, which you can find on YouTube, but also explored on the literacy bug at on the page Stages of Literacy. So, but what I want viewers to do is to take the understanding that's encapsulated in the stages of literacy development and apply them today to some case studies. Okay, so it goes without saying, why are we so passionate about this? Is we want people to catch the literacy bug in all of its richness. We want developing readers and writers to engage in literacy in a variety of ways. We want them to inform and be informed, entertain and be entertained, to persuade and be persuaded, as well as ponder, explore, and speculate through the written word. So it's that long-term goal of learning through print, learning through multimedia, etc. And so to do this, all across the age frame, we need to talk regularly with our learners, discuss with those older learners, engaging in rich debates and discussions and questioning, and with younger learners, lots of verbalization around play, introducing vocabulary, and knowing that talk is a way that we come to encounter and explain and explore our words, and oral language is the foundation of literacy. And we want to read to learners, read with them, and help them read on their own, write for learners, write with those learners, and help them write on their own, develop those key skills, phonemic awareness, letter-sound correspondence, vocabulary, grammar, fluency, etc., build up their content knowledge, so that rich resource for further understanding, and provide ample opportunities for those learners to use language and literacy as tools for understanding and action, using poetry, using recipe writing, using language and literacy, and finding it meaningful and purposeful. So that consolidates their development of skills. And this is an understanding that literacy is componential. So just learning oral language and being strong with oral language isn't enough. You also need to develop phonemic awareness, letter-sound correspondence, but then also learning your phonics isn't enough. There's many components to literacy. And it's cumulative. Over time, those skills are developed, and progressively over time, certain foundational skills, certain fluency is required to take most advantage in comprehension and critical analysis. And it's also transactional. It happens between people. We might develop great computer programs that might simulate literacy, but what really is important is how meaning is negotiated and discussed between peers, between adults and children. And so that notion of being initiated into what does it mean to be literate. And so this is a bit of a roadmap. It includes the components of literacy. So on one side, on the red side, is the components of language, children developing their phonology, their vocabulary, and their grammatical understanding, their use of language, and the application of that language within context. And through that, becoming aware, developing an understanding, a linguistic knowledge of how language works, and using that language to have debates, to give speeches, to have discussions, to tell stories, etc. And simultaneously, children are developing the phonological awareness, the understanding of the alphabetic principle, their letter knowledge, their sight word recognition, their phonics progression and spelling and decoding and encoding progression, until they become very adept at how print works. And with the combination of both adeptness with print and adeptness with language, they become more fluent. They can see language through print, which becomes a vehicle in which they can provide more energy, more cognitive energy to comprehension and composition and critical knowledge. And that's reflected here as in the first 6 years of life, the most dramatic focus is upon oral language development, understanding the sound structure within language and applying that to the knowledge of how letters work and how words are constructed. And with that foundation, initial work on decoding individual words and then reading connected texts before moving on to trying to consolidate that print knowledge and learn to read. And with that basis of learning to read, it's that switch to reading to learn, because I'm now becoming fluent and my focus is on comprehension, etc. And it's that sort of framework that we'll be talking about the needs of a particular learner within those stages of development. Okay, but as we said before, learning those rules and principles, we've touched it before. We've learned those intellectually, but that's not equivalent to mastering the practice of teaching. So that we need to require to know how to use all of that knowledge, apply all of that knowledge in actual teaching practice. And we'll touch the tip of that iceberg by looking at a few case studies. So we may know what we need to focus upon. Now let's focus upon how. How do we do that? Okay, so let's get to the rough ground. We will present some case studies. Now, for each of those case studies, we'll say, what do you notice about the learner? What strikes you about that learner? What skills should we focus upon? And what skills has the learner developed so far? What should that learner be developing now? And what are we preparing that learner for in the future? And what types of activities, learning opportunities will the learner benefit from? And how would you arrange both informal and formal teaching routines? And what materials would you need to make this happen? And what are possible barriers that you've noticed? And are there any learning opportunities that we should take advantage of in this case? And do I know what success looks like? And how can I monitor the learning with this in mind? And so for each of those case studies, if I boil down, to prepare for that case study, we'll need to gather and interpret information about one or more learners, create an appropriate instructional plan, set aside some time and space for teaching and learning to occur, work towards those goals and maintain the learner's motivation throughout, monitor their progress, and dream big for that learner. Have big expectations. What was it? High support, high challenge for successful learning. And this is just a list that goes into further detail. So I won't actually touch upon this as much, summarizing, interpreting information, identifying the learner's stage of development, drafting a report, etc. But the previous slide sort of provides a little bit more succinctly what we want to do for each case study that I'm going to present. And if you need to imagine, okay, what's the context? So I'm going to look at this case study, and I'm going to identify what I've seen. How should I best approach it? So in this case, what I want you to do, perhaps imagine you're a tutor. You're a volunteer tutor. You're working one-on-one with a learner, or maybe you're coordinating a tutoring program at a school. And so as part of your role, you're attending and conducting tutor training, or you're attending a site orientation, and you're expected to tutor for, let's say, up to 12 weeks, one visit per week with that learner. And every visit, you have the opportunity to attend a debriefing session to say, well, progress has been made, and get feedback upon where to go to next. Or you're a coordinator, so you host those debriefing sessions, and you can give advice to your tutors upon what they should be doing. Throughout that process, you're keeping a teaching and learning log portfolio, and then you're prepared at periodic points or at the end of your tutoring experience to provide some progress notes or some handover notes. Because what we know is learning doesn't end, but it might adjust and shift over time. Okay, all straightforward so far. So key principles. Based upon that last observation about handover notes, we start off, first thing we need to do is develop a student profile. Set some literacy goals, numeracy goals as well, potentially. Gather together a plan of activities. Identify a suitable space and time for teaching and learning to occur. Set out a sequence. What am I going to do across, let's say, 4 sessions, 5 sessions, 6 sessions, etc. And then, now let go micro skills, conduct each lesson, reflect upon progress happening in each of those lessons, monitor progress, tick things off as you go, reflect upon growth, and then update that student profile so that you can set new goals, new activities, etc. Or you can recommend new goals, new activities, etc. But if we do one more little bit of theory, not one more, but a few little bit of theory, what we are imagining, we've got a learner. You're going to meet this learner in a second. And all learning happens within a context. And so if we look at activity theory, what we have is we have a subject, and that subject is the learner. Whether it's a child learning to ride a bike or learning to play phonemic awareness games or learning to read, we've got a learner. And the object is what's being learned. So riding a bike, learning to read, learning to sew. The outcome is what will that learning enable the child to do? So I'm a child, I'm learning to ride a bike, and the outcome of that is I can play with my friends. I can get fit. I can not only play with my friends, but I could ride on the weekends with my parents. But there's other factors reinforcing the purpose of that learning. And the more that those outcomes are shared by both the learner as well as the community, the better. So learning how to ride one's bike is reinforced if this is seen as something really cool or that everyone should be doing. Or let's say learning how to swim. If I'm growing up in a coastal town and I'm learning how to swim, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want to go to the beach. But what if I don't live anywhere near a beach, and what if I don't live anywhere near a pool, etc.? There might be less of an outcome of learning to swim, less of a reinforcement. Now, going back to the inner circle, I need certain materials, certain equipment to learn. I need to learn certain rules to be successful. I need to have certain people to show me how to learn. So whether it's teachers as well as peers and parents, I need a community around me to do this. And those different people play different roles. So the teacher plays a particular role, the peers play a particular role, and there's a community that reinforces that learning. Okay, so I want you to apply that. So think of a situation in which you either taught something or you learned a particular skill. And in that context, I want you to think about, okay, who was the learner? What was being learned? What was the outcome? What was the why? Why was that being learned? What equipment was necessary for that learning? What rules and procedures did the subject or the learner need to follow? Who were involved? What was the community that helped the learner develop these skills? And did those people play different roles? Okay, we can pause for a second. You could pause the video and reflect on those questions or do those later. Okay, let's imagine that I've given you plenty of time to do that. But that's one way of looking at, I'm tutoring, I'm supporting. Like, who's my learner? What are they attempting to learn? Why are they trying to learn this? What equipment do I need to help them along the way? What tips and advice do I need to provide them? And who else? Who's involved in this besides myself? Who else is involved? And what role do those different people play in helping that learner grow? And there's different types of learning we need to be mindful of. Some things are very practical, very visible, that we learn in a very short amount of time. It's like learning a game, learning how to play Uno, or learning about how to play chess, or learning how to sew. The skill itself is very practical to observe. And it might take only a little bit amount of time to be able to participate in that skill, even though it might take a greater amount of time to master it. Though like an activity system, it might be easier to develop that skill in an existing community in which there's lots of people playing that game, or there's lots of people sewing, or lots of people knitting. I've got a lot of reinforcement and also a lot of time to be able to achieve that. There's other types of learning are about initiating someone into something that's both a skill but also an appreciation of something. So learning how to read and write poetry, or learning the scientific method, or learning how to meditate or pray. It's more than just learning how to do something. It's having an appreciation of why you do it. And that might take more time and more scaffolding and more reflection and more support from a community to not only do something, but do something in the manner that is accurate and reflective to that practice. There are other sort of types of activities that take a long time. So there's many stages that you can't just teach something in one sitting, but looking at the long-term growth. So learning to read, learning to play a musical instrument, learning a new language, learning how to run a marathon. All these are things that take a long-term time and long commitment, and also the need to maintain motivation over time. And last but not least, in this little, I guess, cursory exploration of types of learning is developing knowledge. So the time that takes to develop the knowledge of how something works. How did the French Revolution occur? Well, who were the players? How do they relate to each other? How do I remember that? And once I remember that, what's the significance here? Or how do I look at the water cycle? How does a water cycle function and work? How does the eyeball work? So these are, how do I develop the knowledge of how something works or functions, how a concept plays out in life. So just keep that in mind. We talk about helping someone learn, but there's a variety of types of learning to be mindful of. But the truism across all of this is a learner requires adequate time, space, and resources to practice, as well as they require the instruction or support that is based on quality teaching and supportive relationships. So this instruction or support must be based on a clear understanding of the learner's needs and interests at that moment or stage. So time, space, and resources. And that's one of the key points in recognizing that you may know what a child needs to do. You might know how to do it, but you might look at the average 30-person classroom and realize, I don't know how I'm going to carve out the space and time for that child to catch up in their skills. Or if I'm working with adults, I know exactly what needs to be done, but finding the time in a busy schedule and also the motivation and the commitment can be quite difficult. Okay, so let's look at learning as collaboration. So let's say if we know that it's happening well, it's achieved with a sense of mutual accomplishment. I'm trying to teach a child how to ride a bike, and the child wants to be able to do it just as much as I do, with some guidance from someone who's more experienced, with opportunities to practice, consolidate, and extend those skills. And in that teaching, there's quality interaction and in-time feedback. I'm right there to say, oh, this is where you got it wrong. This is how you'd fix it. I'm teaching maths, and I'm giving really strong feedback. Having really good conversations to regulate what the child's doing well, what the learner's doing well, and to reinforce what they need to do next. And it's there just right at the right time. And then there's also time to go beyond just focusing on the skill itself to discuss, well, what's the significance of the skill? And I'm going to give you opportunity to extend and to celebrate what you achieved, and for learners to be able to put their own stamp on things. So they're learning how to read, but we're reading newspaper articles and we're having questions and discussions. And it's not only just reading for practice, but that learner thinks that they're developing a particular expertise or a particular knowledge about the world, and that sense of achievement is quite important. Okay, so practice makes perfect. We must appreciate how the student, in every circumstance, whether they're learning how to write an essay, learning how to read accurately, or learning how to spell, they're a novice who's continually attempting to make sense of a new situation, and they have to acquire the skills necessary to function in that situation. My role as a teacher is to arrange tasks and activities to make that learning more easily accessible. So let's practice. Another thing. What I've provided you here with are 3 scenarios, writing scenarios. One is a child learning to write or being asked to write a 1,000-word story. Second one, child being asked to write a newspaper article about a local event. And the third is to write a film review. What I want you to think about is, How do I make this learning, the invisible structures and processes of writing each of these texts, more visible, more clear? How do I help the students go from a blank page to gradually building this text so that I initiate them into the tenets of how to write a story, how to write a newspaper article, how to write a film review? And if I give one hint here is, for each of these tasks, the student has experienced a story, has experienced an article, has experienced a film review, but they might not see the patterns and structures that you notice and that you use to plan and prepare and write more effectively. Okay, so I'll give you a couple moments to reflect. Choose one of those situations, perhaps pause the video, write some notes down, or write some notes down now and revisit it after watching the video. Okay, so I wonder what, at this stage, this is when I wish I had a live class in front of me, because I can see the ideas and see how people initiated or broke down or deconstructed or scaffolded the writing of a story, or the writing of a newspaper article, or the writing of a review. I'd be very curious. But one thing that you probably were doing is making explicit some of the structures in each of those texts and what to be looking out for. And this reminds me of something from one of my key, influencers, Ludwig Wittgenstein, because he said that for any act of learning, it involves 4 stages of seeing. And one thing that's really important here is you start off being aspect blind. I don't know my way about it. I don't know how to break something apart. I need someone to show me how something's constructed and reveal that to me, so that I can see the aspects, see the patterns, and see the structures, and I can utilize those patterns to make progress. And then once I utilize those patterns, I can look around me and the rest of the world, and I can actually notice, oh, I can see it too. I can see how these patterns that an expert sees are all around me until they become second nature. And that's sort of reflected here. And one key part, if I'm aspect blind, it doesn't mean I have no knowledge or no understanding at all. It's just I'm not seeing the patterns. For instance, I might be a film buff. I love films. I love watching films, but no one's actually deconstructed a film for me. And I haven't been able to intuit the structures of how films are made myself. So I can see a film, I can watch a film, but I'm blind to the nuances of how it's constructed. Or let's look at it another way. I'm watching someone play chess, and I don't know it's chess, or I've seen chess before, but no one's ever taught me the rules. And so I can notice and I can identify that as chess, but I'm blind to the nuances and rules. I need someone to show me the aspects, show me the patterns, reveal to me the rules. And that is a very empowering part. Suddenly I realize, oh, I can do this. There's some logical sense to how this works. And I usually tell this to my tutors who are working, let's say, in a high school setting with English language learners or students from refugee backgrounds, is that suddenly it's like, oh, I'm here, I have to write a speech, but I don't know my way in. I don't know how to break it into parts so that I can make progress, until someone with experience, with greater expertise says, this is an easy way to do it. I'll break it down into steps, and let's do that together to write a first speech. And then you'll notice that if we want to write another speech, it's based on the same principles. And so then I realize, I'm just reading a speech, and I notice it's using those same conventions. I've suddenly not only been shown those aspects, but I can see those patterns outside in the world. Or let's say I'm going back, I'm looking at a car engine. I'm blind, I don't know what the different pieces of a car engine, what roles they play, but someone introduces me to those aspects, and suddenly I realize, there's a logic to this. And I look at a totally different engine away from my teacher, and I can see this has the same parts as the ones that I've been shown previously, until it becomes second nature. Not everyone reaches this point of second nature. Sometimes we rely upon those experts who continuously see in a particular manner. For instance, I send a car to a mechanic to get fixed because I may notice how certain aspects of a car engine works, but I sort of need someone with that expertise. And so what we want to be doing, whether it's teaching spelling patterns or comprehension strategies or learning how to write, is to initiate learners into a way of seeing, and then suddenly that they see that there's something logical and there's a way of working that isn't mysterious. And that in itself is very empowering. And so how do we do that? Scaffolding. So scaffolding refers to all the hints and the modeling and the activities and the guides that we provide to help a learner successfully and knowledgeably and confidently complete a task. And that we use that metaphor from Wittgenstein about a ladder. I provide a ladder, and they can take that step by step up to the top of the ladder and realize, wow, I've done it. I can throw that ladder to the side because I've now at a new plateau. But without that scaffolding provided by that teacher, without those step-to-step guides, I would have never reached that plateau. So gradually over time, the teacher cedes more control to the learner and eventually want that learner to be independent so they no longer need the scaffolding that we provided beforehand. They're now achieved and attained that. And part of that scaffolding is task analysis. As I look at a task, whether it's learning to sew or learning to make a cake or learning to develop or over time becoming a good speller or a good reader. And I break that goal into stages and parts. And I make that explicit and clear to my learner. And I can say, this is the pathway to successful learning. And I want learners to be able to preview, if I look at the bottom here, preview what success looks like. Okay, we're working towards this goal. And they understand the steps involved in getting there. And they have the opportunity to practice and experience growth along the way. And they can reflect on and refine practices because that task has been divided into parts for them. And they can celebrate and articulate success. And they can also identify where they struggled and where they needed additional support. So to practice that notion of task analysis is knowing what the goal is and then analyzing and breaking that task into those step-by-step stages of learning, giving you another set of scenarios. So these again are all writing scenarios. So delivering a speech at a cricket awards ceremony, so both writing and as well as speaking, conducting an interview with a member of a local council, so again, speaking and listening plus writing, and then researching a prominent Australian. So what I want you to do is choose one of those situations and say, how would I break up that task into stages and parts, make the stages of learning explicit for the learner, so suddenly they've got a pathway towards growth. Because, and again, I go back to some of the tutors that I train, they realize that their major role is to suddenly provide pathways towards learning. And the learner looks at them going, oh, that's how I'm supposed to go about doing it. You can leave me alone now. Now I know how I need to learn. And I just need you to check in with regularly along that pathway. Okay, give you a couple minutes. Like before, you can pause this video, work on some notes, or make some initial notes, and do the rest after the video. Okay, you can also use this scaffold to reflect back on those scenarios. What's the goal up here? And then breaking up those steps. Might need more steps than these. And then not looking at what does success look like here. So whatever we're doing, we're establishing joint attention, whether it's a speech, building a shared learning intention, I'm modeling, I'm guiding the learner, and then I'm stepping back a little bit and just facilitating, and then we're reviewing together. Let's say we're writing a speech. It's a circle, so let's do another one together. Let's do another one together until I feel like the learner is becoming more and more independent. Further opportunities to practice, even more opportunities to practice until that skill is consolidated and provides some extension that really challenges that learner. Whether that's, again, increasing the complexity of spelling, and then providing opportunities for that learner to spell those words correctly within context until they become truly consolidated. Okay, so I want you to reflect upon a situation in which you either taught or learned a particular skill. What was being learned? Was it clear to you? Who was the teacher? How did the teacher lead you through the skill, model the skill? How were you further guided and supported to continue practicing that skill? How much practice did you need before you felt comfortable with that skill? Were you given chances to extend the skill, so that learning, to different situations? And did you have any chances to understand the purpose of key steps or parts? Why did we do it that way? Could we do it another way? And in the end, do you feel like you had a strong grasp of the skill? Why or why not? Was that teaching really effective? Or when you look back on it, do you wish you had it was different in some way? And if so, how? So, to consolidate that, what's important is we have an understanding of what's the goal for that learner. When we look at each of those case studies, what are the goals, or a singular goal? Understanding where that student is. So where that student is, what do we want that student to achieve? And how, by activities and milestones, how are we going to get there? And that's what Hammond and Gibbons refers to as that learning by design process, which requires looking in two directions: the goal and the student's current skills, and developing a plan from there. And we need to ask ourselves questions. To what extent is teacher expertise really important in that process? How does a teacher make that learning visible and explicit, in that pathway learning in visible and explicit for the learner? And how do we make sure that we arrange the required time and space for teaching and learning to occur? Because ultimately, we care about the students. We want them not just to develop skills, but we want them to develop as learners, as people in communities of practice. And success builds on success. Because as students gain confidence, they're willing to work harder, and they're more ready to learn and commit. So that's why learning is more like a spiral than just a funnel, progressively building over time. Okay, without further ado, let's examine these cases. So, repeating those questions for each of the ones that I'm about to show you: what did you notice? What struck you about the learner? What skills should be focused upon? What has the learner developed so far, etc., etc.? What activities would you recommend, etc., etc.? What routines would you reinforce? What are certain barriers? What are certain opportunities? And how do I monitor that learning over time? So keep those questions in mind that we presented earlier. Okay, first one, meet Maria. We're going to have 4, so you can go back later and reflect. Maria is a 10-year-old girl in year 4, grade 4, in Southern California. She's a native English speaker in a exclusively English-speaking household, and she attends a school that's predominantly or majority English-speaking. Her parents are both educated and are in the workforce, and her peers and siblings read often, and a few write their own stories and enjoy engaging in drama. So there's a really quite engaged context for Maria. At school, Maria's teachers say that her language skills are advanced. She has a strong vocabulary, she has a strong command over sentences, and she communicates cohesively and coherently. She's mastered phonemic awareness, she's able to spell and decode all the words that one would expect of her age, and she reads with age-expected fluency. She reads with sufficient comprehension, but she can often lose focus when reading longer pieces of text, and she often requires support to review what she has read in order to understand all the main points and information. But once this is done, she's able to have a rich discussion of what she's read. And similarly, when she writes text, she can write really effectively, but only after receiving quite intensive support on organizing and structuring her ideas. So she struggles to do this independently on her own. She's motivated and has a wide range of interests, though there are not many opportunities at home for her to discuss what she reads. So she reads widely, but she might not necessarily talk much about what she reads, and also what she writes at home. So at the moment, she's studying the novel Bridge to Terabitha, as well as Egyptian history and sustainable environments. Maria has a strong literacy routine for her class. But overall, how would you go about supporting Maria? You can pause the video and reflect upon it immediately. Let's go to our second learner, Jonathan. So Jonathan's a 7-year-old boy in year 1 in regional Georgia. Again, like Maria, he's a native English speaker, and he's growing up in an English-speaking household at a school in which his fellow peers are also English-speaking. Jonathan's mother is concerned about his lack of progress and competence with reading. She reports that Jonathan engages with the pictures in an illustrated story, but he often really struggles to decode the printed words, and she soon loses concentration and interest when asked to read. This has become more noticeable as reading tests have become more complicated. So whilst Jonathan is known to be generally well-behaved and attentive, it is becoming apparent that his comprehension and decoding skills are below grade level. And despite this, his mother and teacher considers his oral language skills to be age-appropriate. For instance, Jonathan loves making up rich, imaginative, vivid stories. After a set of comprehensive assessments, it is found that Jonathan requires support in a number of areas. In relation to phonemic awareness, he's able to identify phonemes within words but struggles to blend and delete them. Jonathan also struggles to detect common decoding patterns. So whilst Jonathan is able to recall common sight words, he struggles to read unfamiliar words with similar patterns to those he has memorized. So Jonathan's recent struggles are likely due to the increasing expectation that he decode words rather than relying upon his sight vocabulary. So Jonathan is a good kid who wants to do well but finds reading befuddling, and he doesn't seem to be making progress with reading despite practice, and in his own words, I don't seem to be getting any better. So Jonathan's teacher is open to ideas and is happy for his mother to seek speech pathologist support as well as additional tutoring support. How would you support Jonathan? So take a moment there. You can do that now, or you can do that at a later stage. Okay, now let's meet Dakota. Dakota's 13 years old. She's in year 7 on the outskirts of Chicago. She's a native Spanish speaker at a school which the majority of students come from non-English speaking backgrounds, though predominantly Spanish speaking, and Dakota moved to the States 5 years ago. And according to the specialist teacher, Dakota is an English language learner with typical development, and in relation to literacy, Dakota's development is consistent with the findings from recent research about English language learners. For instance, Dakota's code-based skills, her spelling and her word reading, are developing a lot more rapidly than her meaning-making skills, such as vocabulary development, sentence reading, and comprehension, as well as her speaking and listening. So whilst Dakota's writing is well organized, it is often very formulaic. So she'll be given a scaffold and she'll stick straight to that scaffold. But with a scaffold, she's able to organize her ideas and commence writing. However, her writing includes frequent errors in sentence construction, subject-verb agreement, verb tense, punctuation, and the use of functional words, not main words, but prepositions, articles, helping verbs, etc. With Dakota's reading, she enjoys practicing to develop fluency, and she really benefits from her weekly tutor who is studying teaching at a local university. So Dakota feels that she can use her skills to problem solve unfamiliar words, even if she doesn't know their meaning. And for this reading practice, the tutor selects texts that he knows Dakota will be comfortable with. However, in class, Dakota struggles to comprehend the material set for the whole class in her academic subject, whether it's science or English or history. So Dakota demonstrates a strong motivation to excel in education, and this is supported by her parents and the encouragement of her teachers and tutors. However, she often gets frustrated, though, as she isn't performing as well as she likes. How would you go about supporting Dakota? Again, you can pause the video, reflect upon, take some notes, do more of it later on. Last but not least, we have David. Now, David is 47 years old. He's an adult learner. He's 47. He's held a number of manual labor jobs throughout his life. He left school in year 9, and he's always struggled with literacy. He lives on his own, though he very often catches up with family, his parents, siblings, nieces, and nephews. Like many adult learners, David has learned to make do. despite being aware of the challenges he's faced. David has tried to engage in adult education many times in the past, but he finds it difficult to find the time for night classes, and also with grueling work, he's often pretty exhausted. So more recently, David has found a program at a local community center that he's been able to commit to for 3 times a week, including one session on Saturdays. And it's one-on-one with a skilled mentor tutor who he gets along with very well. He struggles to read with any confidence. His decoding skills would be equivalent to a year 2 or 3 student. He often gets headaches when looking at print for any length of time, and he often states that the print swims around on the page. When reading with his mentor tutor, he often sounds out a word and asks, "What does that mean?" which also suggests that he struggles with vocabulary and vocabulary comprehension. Now, David's goal is to read the newspaper confidently and have a conversation with his mentor tutor. He also likes to read stories and books that he'd also like to read stories and books that he could discuss. It's apparent that David enjoys the social aspect of his lessons as much as the learning that he is experiencing. But despite these goals, David is still nervous about the reports, the types of documents he'd have to read and write if he were to be promoted at work. He's also a bit nervous about the increasing types of documents he's expected to read and write as part of his daily job that he wouldn't have been expected to do 10 years ago. So despite these nerves, his mentor tutor encourages David and asks him to be patient. So David's experience reflects what we know about a lot of adult learners. They prefer informal settings like a community center over a school or formal setting. How would you go about supporting David? Again, please pause the video, write some notes down, reflect on it now, return to it at a later stage. And last but not least, I want you to reflect upon each of the stages, or each of the case studies. What were the main differences that you noticed between those case studies? What could we assume in the cases of one learner and not another? What does literacy look like for one person, such as Maria, and what does it look like for another, Jonathan? And if you were to write a definition of literacy for each person, how would those definitions differ? And how do those case studies exemplify what Catherine Snow has told us? Being literate is a very different enterprise for the skilled first grader, fourth grader, high school student, and adult. So just comparing some of those case studies after you've had time to reflect on them more closely. And remember, what we need to do: talk, read, write. Talk regularly with our learners, read to them, read with them, help them read on their own, write for them, write with them, help them write on their own, develop their skills, build their content knowledge, and provide opportunities for that they can use language and literacy as tools that are practical tools, meaningful tools, relevant tools for understanding and action. And as he said, different routines for different stages, and the instruction needs to suit the learner. Okay, last but not least, these following slides are just templates that you could utilize in each of those case studies and also into the future. So just one, a brainstorming. Looking at a case study and then just brainstorming, okay, what do I notice? What would I do? And then circle down below, what would I focus attention on? Looking at, again, ticking, what areas would we focus upon? What would I want to achieve in the areas that I've identified? What are my focus areas? How am I monitoring? What activities would I do to help in those areas? And what are some outcomes and observations that I'd expect? You can I have a long progress checklist that you could utilize. Go to that bit.ly link to download that checklist. A bit overkill in this situation. Many of you might have seen this before. Student profile sheet. What has the learner accomplished? What are they currently developing? What are the expectations of their age? And what's the goals and what's an action plan that I can set for that learner? Similarly, what content do I want to explore? What literacy skills do I want to explore? And how do I put all that together? What's my teaching rationale? Based on my analysis, this is what my teaching should include. Why? What are the elements? What activities would I do? What are my expectations? And what are the objectives at the end? And then this is a lesson planning template. Great, if useful, etc. This is a reflection template. I had this teaching with one or more students. This is what we focused upon, trying to focus on 3 or 4 areas at a time. What were the goals of the session? What materials did I need? What procedures did I follow? How do I know if the learner's actually making growth, etc.? Taking progress notes, either as a planning template, looking at the sessions. I've got, let's say 12 sessions with this learner. What do I want to do in each of those sessions? Or this might be a record-keeping device each week. What was the date? Description of the lesson. What skills did we focus upon? What was the outcome of those skills? So on and so on and so on. This is more global. From a period of this date to this date, how would I reflect upon their growth in reading? A scale of 5, what did we read? How would I rate them on a scale of 5? What notes in writing, in topic exploration, in vocabulary, in language and literacy features, in other skills, and in motivation? Periodically doing a reflection upon how are they going in each of those areas. And last but not least, some questions that would form a progress report or some handover notes, starting off with things like, what were my initial observations when focusing on the learner? What was the instructional plan based upon those observations? In actual practice, to what extent were we able to keep to that plan, or how did that plan change over time? What learnings occurred? What might need to be adapted or adjusted? What recommendations would I provide for for future teaching and learning? And what are some barriers and opportunities to be mindful of? Obviously, this most likely wouldn't be enough space for progress notes or handover notes, but they give you the logic of things that could form the backbone of those notes. So, in conclusion, my biggest conclusion is I wish I had a group of individuals in front of me right now to go through and reflect and get everyone's sort of ideas, because I think this is a really interactive presentation. But what was the point again? We wanted to use our collected knowledge about the stages of literacy to develop appropriate instructional plans and activities for a range of learners. And I think I'll come back to this presentation with some answers in my own reflection on case studies and get people's feedback and discussion. What would you need to do for each of those case studies? Well, gather and interpret information about one or more of those case studies, create an instructional plan, set aside some time and space for that learner. How would you work towards those goals? How would you monitor progress? How would you dream big for that learner? And here's a few things to be mindful of. When providing this type of support, it's not about teaching, it's about helping someone learn. And that's straight from the words of a past student of mine. And that same student said, my teachers helped me along the way. They not only taught me skills, but they kept me motivated. They said, keep going. They guided me. So they not only helped me organize my time, they helped me organize my assignments, my essays, but they also helped me cope. When I felt like I wasn't making as much progress, they gave me encouragement. And when they saw me making a good amount of progress, they said, don't slow down. You got to keep going. Because at the end of the day, I need to be diligent and anxious as a teacher, whether I'm a teacher in a classroom, whether I'm a tutor, whether I'm in an early childhood setting, or whether I'm a parent. I'm a teacher. I stand in front of awaiting eyes, ears, mouths, and minds, and I'm there to be enthusiastic. I can be nervous because I want to do a good job. I want to support everyone in that room. Some might get lost at times, and I need to tap into their knowledge and their interests, but I need to be diligent throughout and never complacent. I will teach with kindness and urgency. I will demonstrate expertise and empathy. I will do my utmost to be of service to the students and to the community. So before I finish off this presentation, I do want to say, if you're watching this and you're a tutor or a teacher or an early childhood educator or a parent putting in lots of great time for your own children, but also other children, or you're an adult education mentor, I'd really like to express my gratitude for the generosity of you dedicating your time to help learners, regardless of age, to become strong readers and writers. So on their behalf and on my behalf, just want to say thank you. So feel free at the end of this, please ask any questions. Please contact me. Please send me your own answers and your own advice. Comment below if you're on YouTube. So visit the Literacy Bug, write us an email, go to YouTube, watch this video and others, follow us on Twitter. I'd be really curious to see people's ideas on the case studies and also comments upon some of the resources that appear in this presentation. So without further ado, thank you very much. I hope you found this useful. I'm looking forward to revisiting this presentation in the future.